When you talk about the all-time great military victories, there's one name that always comes up: Austerlitz. It's widely seen as Napoleon Bonaparte's single greatest performance, his absolute masterpiece.
And hey, don't just take my word for it. Historians like Richard Overy point to this battle as the ultimate proof of Napoleon's genius, the one that really sealed his legend as one of the best commanders who ever lived.
But here's the crazy part. Right before the battle, Napoleon was in a terrible position. I mean, on paper, he should have lost. He was outnumbered, deep in enemy territory, just completely overextended. So the real question is, how in the world did he manage to turn such a weak hand into the most legendary victory of his entire career?
To really get it, you have to understand the massive risk he was taking. This wasn't just another battle for him. Nope, this was a huge all-or-nothing gamble.
I mean, just look at the situation he was in. His supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. His army was completely exhausted from weeks of non-stop marching. One soldier even called them a scarecrow army. And to top it all off, he was badly outnumbered by the combined Austrian and Russian forces. Oh, and hovering over everything was the massive threat of Prussia, just waiting in the wings, ready to jump in with another 180,000 troops. Napoleon didn't just need a win, he needed a knockout blow, and he needed it now.
And this is where things get really interesting on the other side. You had this huge clash of personalities in the Allied command. You've got the young and ambitious Tsar Alexander I, who was just itching for a glorious, heroic victory. And then you've got the old, cautious, experienced General Kutuzov, who knew exactly how dangerous Napoleon was and argued they should pull back and wear the French out. Well, you can guess who won that argument. The Tsar's ego took over, and he played right into Napoleon's trap. So, how did Napoleon respond to all this? Well, he didn't just wait around for his enemies to mess up. No, he decided to engineer a mistake himself by setting one of the most brilliant and elaborate traps in the history of warfare.
He laid it out in 4 incredible steps. First, he pretended to be weak, sending diplomats to beg for a truce, making himself look desperate. Then he did something that must have looked insane to his opponents. He ordered his troops to abandon the Pratzen Heights, the most important piece of high ground on the whole battlefield. He even staged a chaotic, panicked retreat when he knew a Russian envoy was watching. And finally, for the finishing touch, he deliberately weakened his own right flank, basically dangling it out there as irresistible bait.
But that's the big question, right? In hindsight, it seems so obvious. Why on earth would 2 emperors and their whole army walk straight into a trap that was laid out so clearly?
And the answer is just fascinating. It wasn't a blunder. It was in fact the most logical move they could have made, based on the completely false reality that Napoleon had so carefully constructed for them.
Think of it like this. Napoleon essentially created a fake game for his enemies to play. He knew they'd be weighing their options, trying to figure out the best move. So with all the signals of weakness he was sending, the fake retreat, giving up the high ground, he made one option look like a guaranteed jackpot. Attacking his weak right flank seemed like the quickest, surest path to a massive victory. He wasn't just fooling them. He was manipulating their own rational decision-making to lead them exactly where he wanted them to go.
So, this is the crucial takeaway. Napoleon's real genius here wasn't just setting a trap on the ground. It was completely changing the mental game his enemies thought they were playing.
And with that perfectly laid trap, the only thing left to do was spring it. This leads us to one of the most famous moments in all of military history.
So the battle begins, shrouded in this thick, heavy fog. By 7 a.m., the main Allied force is doing exactly what Napoleon wanted, throwing everything they have at his supposedly weak right flank. Then, around 9 a.m., the legendary Son of Austerlitz burns through the fog, and what it reveals is a gift. The Pratzen Heights, the center of the Allied line, is now almost totally empty. That was the signal. Napoleon unleashed his main force, which had been hidden in the mist, straight into the gut of the enemy army. By the afternoon, the Allied army was completely shattered and running for their lives.
His order to his marshals, right at that critical moment, just captures the sheer power and decisiveness of it all. Let us finish this war with a thunderclap. And boy, did they ever.
The results were, well, just look at them. They're staggering. The French lost about 8,800 men. The Allies, around 27,000. That's a full third of their entire army gone in a single day. It wasn't just a victory, it was an absolute annihilation.
But the story doesn't end on the battlefield. Not even close. The shockwaves from this one day of fighting were about to completely redraw the map of Europe. Okay, so for a little context, we need to talk about the Holy Roman Empire. For more than 1,000 years, this complicated mess of territories had been a central fixture in Europe. I'm talking a political entity that stretched all the way back to Charlemagne.
And after this one battle, Napoleon just wiped it from existence, gone.
Here's how it all went down. The victory immediately ended the war. Austria was forced to sign a humiliating peace treaty. Napoleon then carved up the German states and created a brand new entity called the Confederation of the Rhine, which was basically loyal to him. A few months later, the Holy Roman Emperor himself, Francis II, officially dissolved his own empire, bringing 1,000 years of history to a screeching halt.
So, what is the lasting legacy of this incredible day? Well, as you can imagine, it's a little more complicated than you might think.
Austerlitz really has this dual legacy. For Napoleon himself, it was the ultimate confirmation of his own genius. But it also planted the seeds of a dangerous overconfidence, this belief that he was basically invincible, which would lead to some huge mistakes down the road. And for Europe, yeah, it was the end of an old world order. But in destroying it, Napoleon unintentionally lit the spark of modern German nationalism, a force that would eventually play a huge part in bringing his own empire crashing down.
Which leaves us with one final, fascinating thing to think about. Is it possible that Napoleon's most perfect victory, this absolute masterpiece of a battle, was also the very first step on the road to his own destruction?